Hello and welcome to this video, which is 2b, that's lesson 2b of Thomas Egenes' Introduction to Sanskrit. In this video we'll be looking at pages 13 to 17 of the printed book, starting off with verbs in the dual number, which in Sanskrit is known as the dvivachana, the two voice, the dual number. Remember that in Sanskrit, whenever we're talking about two things, we have to use that separate number. In English, and indeed in most languages that distinguish singular from plural, a singular is one and a plural is more than one, that is two or more. In Sanskrit, there are three numbers. You have the singular, the plural is three or more, but if you're talking about just two people or two things, you have to use the dual, and that goes across verbs and nominals and pronouns as well. So, for example, even if we're talking about I and we, in English, you're talking about just yourself alone, I, you with somebody else, even just one other person, we. In Sanskrit, if you're talking about yourself and just one other person included in the we, you have to use the dual, the separate form of the pronoun and the verb. If you use the plural form of we, you can only use that correctly if you're talking about yourself and at least two others, in other words, three or more. So we'll look at how the verbs go in the dual number. We'll use the paradigm of that simple, but as I've said before, slightly irregular verb, gam gachati. I will share my screen with you. Here we go. Right. So moving on to the next page now. The screen you're seeing at this moment is part of lesson 2a. I will keep the same PDF document notes for an entire lesson. So the dual number of the verbs, I'll write them down in the singular first, so you've got a ready comparison in front of you. He, she, or it goes gachati. You go singular gachasi. I go gachami. Now, the third person dual, two things or two people, those two go, is gachata. So the same gacha as before, and the ending is taha. The second person, that's talking you two go, is gachataha. The only difference is that the taha of the ending is aspirated. So it's written like this. Gachataha. And the dual, we two, the both of us go, is gachavaha. 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 Notice, and we'll see this also in the plural, that just as you have the short ati, asi, and ata, ata, that's in the for he, she, it, and you. In the first person, that's the I and we, that R is lengthened. So you have gachami, and in the dual, gachava, and you'll find it again when we come to the plural, which is gachamaha, where you just change the plural, we in the plural go, that verb becomes a m, otherwise it's identical. So note that this characteristic long R for the army, arbaha, armaha in the plural, whereas throughout the rest of the conjugation it's the short a. Gacchati, gacchasi, gacchami, and so on. Now it says here that the ending tas becomes a taha when it forms a verb. In fact, okay, yes, it does, but that statement is far too narrow. A final S always becomes a when it stands at the end of a word group, say at the end of a verse of poetry, for example, or the end of a sentence in prose. It also changes from S to that subdotted H, the visarga, the before certain unvoiced consonants, before right in English, k, k, p, p. You'll learn the rules for that in due course, but just bear in mind that whenever you're writing a word in isolation, as in a grammar book here, I'm just talking about the word, or end of a sentence, end of a line of poetry, the final S, same also applies to final R, always becomes subdotted her. So, for example, the word punar, meaning again, at the end of a sentence or word group or line of poetry becomes punah. Now to the interrogatives. In English, I'm reading from the page here, interrogative words usually begin with a wh, wh, such as where, when, etc. In Sanskrit, interrogative words usually begin with a ka, and it's the same in Pali, by the way. So you'll notice these interrogative words mostly begin with a ka in Sanskrit, and those of you who know the Latin languages and the Slavonic languages, these interrogative words begin with a K or a K sound in most of the, or in fact, I think in all of the languages derived from Latin, and certainly in Russian and Polish, and as far as I know, the other Slavonic languages as well. So this K that we have in from Latin and then into the Romance languages, the French, Italian, and Spanish, and in the Slavonic languages, they're all traceable back to this Proto-Indo-European interrogative K. And our sound hua is actually a phonetic development of that same sound. So when, for example, in English we say who used to be a ho sound, it's actually the same, originally the same as the Sanskrit ko, who and ko. It's the same word. So look now at the sentence given in paragraph 2 on page 13. It's kutra gacchati. Where is he going? Note that in English, when we're asking a question, we reverse the noun and verb order. He is going, is he going, where is he going? Sanskrit doesn't do it that way. Where you have an interrogative word in Sanskrit, the use of the interrogative word is of itself enough to indicate, that's all you need to indicate that it's a question. So gacchati, he is going. Kutra gacchati, where is he going? So kutra. These things get a little bit easier if I tell you, for example, we have the interrogative where, kutra, beginning with a k and ending with the tra. You also find that same tra ending indicates place. So, for example, atra means here, and tatra is there. So you often combine the k of the interrogative with the second part of the word, which indicates, in this particular case, the tra indicates place. And for example, kada means when, as a question. And in Sanskrit, then, tada means then. So learn to spot these patterns, and it'll make vocabulary learning much easier as you go along. So, kutra gacchati, where is he going? Kutra vasasi, where do you live? So paragraph 3, I needn't read that out. That's just saying, you know, if you're translating to English, write it in correct English. Yeah, great. So under the vocabulary, on page 14, we have kutra, which is an indeclinable. That means it never changes its form or shape. Kutra, where, is always kutra. There's never any change to that word. We see here three roots, bhu, vas, and smrit. Bhu, meaning to be, and he, she, or it is bhavati. Now once you know it's bhavati, you equally know that you are is bhavasi, I am is bhavami, we are, the two of us, we two are, is bhavabha, you two are is bhavata, and they are, they, the two of them are, is bhavata. From vas, meaning to live in the sense of not just to be alive, it means to live in, to dwell somewhere. Where do you live? Kutra vasasi. And he lives is vasati. And the root smri, to remember, with guna of the ri becomes smarati. He remembers. The standard translation of Pali sati, Sanskrit smriti, is mindfulness. So it's from the root smri, to remember. You can make a verbal noun out of that by adding the verbal noun suffix ti. So you get smriti, of which the basic meaning is to remember, but the specialized meaning is mindfulness. For example, in Pali, the Satipatthana Sutta, in Sanskrit is the Smrityupasthana Sutra. The sutta on the establishing the upasthana of smriti, mindfulness. So smriti, Pali doesn't have the root sound, and the SM has to become just a simple S. That is why Sanskrit smriti becomes Pali sati. So sati in Pali is the word that we translate most commonly as mindfulness. Incidentally, sati, you've heard of sati, the Hindu, the old practice of the Hindu widow having to immolate herself. That's not this, that is a pure Sanskrit word, and actually it's with a long E at the end. Sati, not sati, but sati. Literally means it's the female, or the feminine, I should say, form of sat, or sant, meaning good. So sati means a good woman or a virtuous woman. We now start to look at sandhi. That's halfway down page 14. And I'll read what it says. Before doing the exercises, we will have an introduction to Sandhi, the rules for how sounds are combined. In English, we say an apple, but a pear. Okay, an a. The word the is often pronounced differently depending on the following word. For example, the house, starting with a consonant, we say the house. But if it starts with a vowel, we don't say the other, it becomes the other, the house, the other house, which is a kind of limited sandhi that we have in English. It goes on, some sounds are modified according to their phonetic environment. Let me give you an example. Let's look at the English word blade and bailed. The l before a vowel is a l sound, but before a consonant it's a consonant sound, it's a l sound. Blade, bailed. And look at the difference between, for example, leaf and feel. Leaf with a l and feel with a l sound. It's the same phoneme in English. That means it's treated as the same letter. It doesn't change the meaning of the word, whether you write it, whether you pronounce it rather with what you call a light l or a dark l. It's treated as being the same sound. For example, the Irish will say leaf and feel with a light l. The Scots will tend to pronounce both of them dark, leaf and feel, always. So it's not a phonemic difference in the sense that they're just two, the linguists say they're in complementary distribution. In other words, that same phoneme, that same essential sound, is pronounced in one context in one way, in a different context in a different way, but it doesn't change the meaning. Unlike, for example, in the Slavonic languages, where there is a phonemic difference. In other words, it's a phonemic difference. It's a different sound, a different meaning, a different word. For example, in Russian, stal and stal. Stal means he stood, and stal with a light l means steel. I mean, steel as in the metal, steel. So they're treated as different phonemes, and there's an important distinction between them in Russian and in other Slavonic languages. Now, in Sanskrit, as we've said before, and as I will go on emphasizing, there is a great importance placed on the correct sounds. And this emerged from the correct recitation of the ancient Vedic hymns. And that is why, whereas in English, sounds can, or particular phonemes, that's essential sounds of the language, can sound different depending on where they are. The examples we've given, leaf and feel, and the house, the other house. We don't represent these changes of sound in the writing, whereas in Sanskrit you do. That's why the writing is always a very precise representation of the sound. So the sandhi occurs where you join two words together, and the last sound of one then comes into contact with the first sound of the other. And either one of them can change or both of them can change. And that happens what we call internal sandhi and external sandhi. That's a technical point that we'll come to a little bit later. But basically, it's the combination of sounds. If you look at this word sandhi, which it can be written like that, very correctly, but in English, the word is pronounced sandhi, by the way, even though it's written with a subdotted M. It's come into English. It's used by linguists in English. I mean, for example, talking in English about the tones of Chinese, you talk about Chinese tone sandhi. In other words, how Chinese words have different tones, but sometimes the tone can change if it's followed by a word in a certain tone. So that word has come to be used universally now among linguists to mean changes of sound when two words are juxtaposed. The meaning of this word sandhi means putting together or junction. And in fact, it is directly cognate with the Greek synthesis. So some in Greek is sin, the D is te. So synthesis means putting together, combining together. So sandhi, synthesis are etymologically the same word. Now, there's a note given here about the exercises. I'm looking now at the last paragraph on page 14. The exercises in lesson 1 are written the same even after sandhi rules have been applied. What that means is this. In textbooks, very simple grammar books, you'll find it in very simple grammar books written in India for speakers of modern Indian languages who are learning Sanskrit. You'll find it done in this book to a certain extent. I'll show in a moment that in order to simplify matters, a word will be written in its unchanged form. In other words, without applying the rules of sandhi to it, because the rules can be a little bit complex. So to make things easier for the student, you'll write the word in its raw, isolated form without applying the sandhi rules. What it means when it says here that the exercises in lesson 1 are written the same even after sandhi rules have been applied is this. If you look at the exercises in lesson 1, I'm looking in particular, we look at the examples given at the bottom of page 6 and in the middle of page 7. All of the words as written there are written in their raw form, but also, because of the way the sentences are, there is no sandhi change that needs to be made. So in other words, all of these are written without applying the rules of sandhi, but they're still perfectly correct Sanskrit, because even if you applied the rules of sandhi, no change needs to be made. Unlike now what we're getting to in lesson 2, where we do have to start applying the rules of sandhi. So let's now look at the exercises, starting halfway down page 15. I will read them slowly in English and give any necessary explanations as we go along. Sorry, read them slowly in Sanskrit and give explanations as we go along. So as before, do your best to make this a purely oral exercise to accustom yourself to the sounds of Sanskrit. And incidentally, if you train yourself to do that, to treat Sanskrit, I mean, you may mostly be reading it, yes, but if you try to train yourself to treat it as sound rather than as the written word, you will generally find the whole business of reading the Devanagari script and applying the rules of sandhi much easier. I wish I'd done it when I was a young student. I didn't. I regret that I didn't. I created a lot of work for myself by not doing it that way. So I encourage you to treat it as sound. So, kutra vasavaha. Kutra vasavaha. That means, where do we live? That's we too. In fact, all of the plural verbs here are in fact dual. Sentence B, you'll see that I'm encouraging you how to look at the book. You'll see that this sentence is written in two different forms, the first form and the second form in brackets. I'll explain that in a moment. Here we're coming to our first application of sandhi now. Bhavasicha, bhavavacha. Bhavasicha, bhavavacha means you singular are, and we too, the two of us are. Now, our first real live sandhi. Look at the sentence in, or listen to the sentence in brackets, bhavasicha, the same sentence, bhavasicha bhavavashicha. So bhavavashicha. Without the sandhi, it was that subdotted H. With the sandhi, that subdotted H that we write in transliteration, the visarga, as it's known, that becomes a sh. First rule of sandhi now. Where you get a final visarga followed by a ch or a ch, it becomes a sh. So, bhavavascha, bhavavascha. Let me give you another example. The root num, this is one that you know. The root num means to bow. It makes a verbal noun in raw form, as the stem form actually is namas. Namas means bowing. Written in isolation, that is namaha. In ancient India, it was probably pronounced without that shadow vowel at the end, most likely pronounced somehow namah. In modern India, it tends to be pronounced namaha, with an echo of the vowel following. But that changes to an S, a straight S, before a word beginning with a T. So te, to thee, to you, singular. So it becomes, it's not namaste, but namaste. Bow to you, I bow to you. Namaste. You will now see that this subdotted the visarga before a ch, you'll very often see, because the ch is such a common, it just means and, as you know, you'll see it the whole time now, the cha becomes ashcha. So in the next sentence, sentence C, I'll read it without the sandhi and then with the sandhi. Vasami, I live, I dwell. Vasami smarata cha. Smarata. It's not an aspirated ta, it's just an unaspirated ta. So it means they two rather than you two. If it were you two, it would be smarata cha, would be transliterated as THA subdotted H. This is smarata. So it's they two. Vasami smarata cha. I dwell and they remember. That's they too remember. Now, applying the sandhi, it becomes the final visarga becomes a sh before the cha. So vasami smaratascha. Vasami smaratascha. So I dwell and they too remember. D. Prichatacha smaraticha. Prichatacha smaraticha. So prichata, here the aspirated ta there. So that means it must be the dual second person, so the two of you. The two of you ask, and he remembers. Prichatacha smaraticha. Applying sandhi now, it becomes prichatascha. Note, prichatascha smaraticha. Next one. Kutra gachava. Kutra gachava means where are we going? Where are the two of us going? No sandhi rule to be applied here. The previous word, kutra, first word I should say, kutra, ends in a vowel. The second begins in a consonant, there's no sandhi to be applied. Kutra gachava, where are we going? And the same applies to the next two sentences. Kutra bhavami. Kutra bhavami. Where am I? Kutra gachami. Kutra gachami. Where am I going? Prichamicha smaraticha. Prichamicha smaraticha. That means I ask and he remembers. Vasasicha gachavahacha. I'll say it again without applying the sandhi rule. Vasasicha gachavahacha, meaning you live, you dwell, and the two of us go. With the sandhi now. Vasasicha gachavascha. Vasasicha gachavascha. Kutra gachasi. Kutra gachasi. No sandhi to be applied here. Where are you going? Kutra gachasi. Now let's look at the sentences for translation into Sanskrit. So first, where are you two going? I'll leave a pause for you to try, and then I'll do it for you. So we start with the indeclinable, the invariable kutra, and the stem gacha, and you two has to end in a tha subdotted h. So kutra gachata. Kutra gachata. No rules of sandhi to be applied there. I live, I dwell, and those two live. Vasami, vasatahacha. In each one where there is sandhi to be applied, I'll say it first without applying the rule of sandhi, and then after applying the rule of sandhi. So, vasami, vasatahacha. I live and they too live. Now, applying the rule of sandhi, you try it first. Vasami, vasatashcha. Vasami, vasatashcha. We two ask, and they two, the two of them, remember. Prichava smaratahacha. Prichava smaratahacha. And with sandhi applied, prichava smaratascha. Prichava smaratascha. Next one. You go and he goes. Gachasi, gachaticha. There's no sandhi to be applied here. Gachasi, gachaticha. Next, where am I going? Try it for yourselves. Kutra gachami. Kutra gachami. I am and you too, as the two of you are. Bhavami, bhavatascha, applying sandhi. Bhavami, bhavatascha. Where are you in the singular? Kutra bhavasi. Kutra bhavasi. And the last sentence in this exercise, where is he going? Kutra gacchati. Kutra gacchati. Now finally, we'll just go through the summary sheet. That's the last page of this lesson, which is page 17 in the printed book. Running through the verbs using the root gam, gacchati. So gacchati, gacchataha, gacchasi, gacchataha, gacchami, gacchavaha. And we now have 5 verbs here. Root gam, present gacchati. Root prach, present prichati. Bhu, to be, bhavati. Vas, to live, to dwell, vasati. Smri, to remember, smarati. And we have the 2 indeclinables, kutra, where, and cha, meaning and. That brings us to the end of lesson 2 of the Egenes Introduction to Sanskrit.